Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome our panelists today to discuss the remaining two pillars of the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. In many ways, these last two pillars might be considered the most critical. The first one is safety and safe and effective systems, and the other one is human fallback. So, in a lot of people's imagination, I believe these are the two most critical sort of direct protections we have from AI systems run amok. If I could ask the panelists to go ahead and turn on their videos, we can start the conversation. I'd like to welcome back most of the panel members, and I'll go ahead and ask each of you, if you don't mind, to go ahead and give a very brief intro of yourself to the audience so they can be suitably impressed with your backgrounds and qualifications. And I'd like to go ahead and start with an alphabetical order of first names. So that's a clear sequence. So Arnold, if you don't mind kicking us off, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ken. My name is Arnold Chu. I'm calling with the Federal Housing Finance Agencies, and I've been involved off and on throughout my career, but currently I'm working to set up a AI Center of Excellence for my agencies. And but I do have to state that, as is required, that all my opinion today is my personal and does not represent anything for my agency.
Yes, understood. Thank you. Britta.
I'm Dr. Britta Hale at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey. I work with various government agencies on security. My background is in cryptography, and I work now with the VA on their AI strategy, among other things, in terms of AI training. And I work with Jake, for example, and various other governments around the world on planning for AI transition. And similarly, the opinions I state here are my own.
Thank you. That'll be Ed next, I think, right? Did I get that right?
Hey, thanks, Ken. My name is Ed McClarney. These are my opinions also. I'm the AI and machine learning transformation lead within NASA's Digital Transformation Initiative. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody. My name is Ramsey Brown. I'm the CEO of Mission Control. We make large language model and AI agent trust infrastructure for the enterprise. I'm also a senior research associate at Cambridge University. My organization delivers the technology for understanding how to work effectively and truthfully with next-gen AI systems and deliver upskilling to the federal sector. And I'm in the unique position of being the CEO, so I get to say that the opinions expressed today are those of mine and the organization's.
Thanks, Ramsey.
I think I'm next. Scott Beliveau. I'm here from the United States Patent and Trademark Office. I'll ditto the comments about being my own and not necessarily that reflecting of my agency. These days, I am the principal innovation architect at the United States Patent and Trademark Office, involved with a lot of the operationalization of emerging technology systems, as well as doing fun stuff with all the crazy data that we have at the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Thank
you, Scott. Very much appreciate that. And thank you all for taking your time today on this topic. We thought a while ago that the Bill of Rights blueprint was going to be important for federal agencies to understand and an effective way to communicate to citizens at large how the federal government's looking at regulating AI policy. And I think the last 4 or 6 months have really proven that's the case. There's a lot of movement, especially around generative AI, large language models. We'll get into that specifically a little bit later. But we also see a lot of other regulation and movement on the Hill. We had a very significant committee meeting yesterday as the House reconvened, and they're beginning a whole new effort regulating AI. And of course, they're all over the place in terms of, you know, what AI is and what we need to be afraid of. So hopefully we can help sort of spread good information about this topic. So if everybody can, if you don't mind, I'd like to go ahead and start with the human fallbacks pillar, and then we'll discuss the safety pillar last, if that works for everybody. And one thing that one benefit you get from being a moderator is you get to sort of ask your questions first. So I'm going to take advantage of that right now, and I'm going to ask everybody to comment on your perspective on the feasibility of this requirement. Is it something that could actually be enforced? And if so, would it be a meaningful safeguard? To me, it strikes me as something that, yes, it'd be a nice to have kind of thing, but how exactly could it be enforced, especially with some of the considerations that are added to it, sort of qualifiers that are added to this pillar that talk about it being, you know, effective and fast and almost courteous, things like that. So I'll throw it out to the group. I don't want to necessarily specify who talks when. So whoever would like to raise their hand first and help me understand that problem, I think that might be helpful. Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Ed. No need to raise hands. Go ahead and just start talking.
Okay. Thanks, Ken. So that's a great question. And truthfully, I was in the Army for 20 years before coming to NASA. And one of the things I thought early in my Army career 30 years ago was, what if the global positioning system fails and, you know, we can't rely on GPS and need to fall back? Similarly, we've seen, you know, over the years, if your email went out at the office, everybody might as well go home. So it's a great question. What I could see is kind of some kind of minimum acceptable capability for fallback. So, you know, many of our AI systems should amplify human capabilities to provide quality service safely, really fast, all these things. And the reason we're using the AI is so that it can really amplify our abilities. So it provides that amplification factor. So part of what I read in the blueprint is that a person needs to be able to punt out of the AI process and get to an actual human being. I think we can all relate to that. But it might be at a sacrifice, like you say, of maybe a little bit of speed or efficiency in order to get that human fallback. Because the compare and contrast between our human-driven systems and our AI-driven systems is that we anticipate our AI-driven systems to be faster, more effective, et cetera. And so giving a little bit of that up in order to get the human fallback would probably be a necessary thing to do.
Right. Go ahead, Ramsey.
I appreciate the perspective, Ed. So I think about AI technologies that today have become increasingly table stakes within the data science community for things like really straightforward linear regression algorithms, or even more advanced neural network semantic and embedding models that look something like really amplified search capabilities, but driven by neural network. And we look at these and say, 10 years ago, these might have been considered relatively avant-garde, 20 years ago, but today they are very straightforward single lines of code compared to more sophisticated frontier models. And so we think of them by default as somehow more reliable and dependable because everything is in a shifting contrast window to what's the most state of the art right now. And the story of technology over the past 30 years has largely been that as we layer stacks of tools and infrastructure on top of one another, we come to realize that we've done a good job hardening certain types of mission critical systems as infrastructural layers, only to build on top of the value chain to consistently find that we're raising the bar of what we consider state of the art. And that's good and right and proper until we realize that for something like TCP/IP or just the basic switching networks that make packets route, we don't have meaningful humans in the loop or human fallback systems for these really bare critical things. And my prediction is that we're going to increasingly do that with AI. And we're going to come to find that we say things like there will always be a human in the system, no matter what. Even in DoD architectures, we'll always have a human fallback. And just on the nature of the inertia of the developments, we're going to come to find that we say, well, really what we meant is there will always be a semantic embedding engine that we can rely back on when the large language model or the agentic system falls over. But these systems layered on top of one another will grow in dependency complexity such that we're not going to have meaningful pathways to true humans in the loop should we continue to go down the default trajectory we appear to be on. So we're going to have to become comfortable with saying, look, no humans actually touch the system in 20 months, but we've got a high degree of visibility and certainty and explainability and dependability into these really base models that are actively monitoring the infrastructure. And that's going to be the best we can get for now. And I say that because we already do that with other parts of our infrastructure. AI is not going to be any different.
Right. Yeah, I'll interject that the phrase back in the day used to be that if it works, it's not AI. So, you know, that's just shifting goalposts. But yeah, the idea that we've already layered in, we already have these essentially foundational elements that we no longer treat as anything to update. I think that's part of the requirement here. Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, if I can add just sort of, you know, I think from the federal perspective in terms of what we need to support and things like that, we do need to, you know, we are in, you know, in the business of providing citizen services and public trust. In doing so, you know, I mean, there are a number of requirements, you know, analogously, maybe, you know, 508, things like that, you know, we do have a responsibility, you know, as good stewards of taxpayer dollars and, you know, society as a whole to, you know, provide, you know, or, you know, the equitable access to this sort of information in a way that, you know, people are most comfortable with to get the benefits out of particular services. You know, that said, as you know, I think as Ramsey was touching on, you know, there comes a time in which, you know, it may be very challenging and difficult, you know, to do that, particularly at all levels, and or to be doing so while still saying yes, and you should trust the system. But you can always opt out. You know, so that said, I think, you know, looking at the pillar, I would maybe suggest sort of a refinement on the human fallback and as maybe a compromise to look at it from the perspective of, you know, maybe there are certain categories in which fallback is more applicable. For example, in the realm of safety, you know, if it's a, you know, AI impacting safety, or, you know, or AI maybe impacting individual rights, you know, whether it be, you know, kind of a decision-making process as to whether you get a loan or not. And maybe, you know, so maybe, you know, I may suggest that, you know, with respect to the Bill of Rights to, you know, bifurcation, maybe sort of a good course of action on that.
Right. Yeah, that's a big part of this discussion around the entire blueprint, I think, is what are those areas where, you know, pieces of a pillar might actually be more applicable to another pillar, and how do we address them consistently? Go ahead, Britta.
One final note I would add on the human fallbacks is that it is a fallback by definition and what we're saying. So it's not a first choice, and it's also that we are probably going to compromise on some functionality by taking that fallback. There's sometimes in the debate surrounding AI, a lot of idealism according to what this human fallback will provide. And we even say things like they'll be quickly be able to remedy the situation. And humans are not going to be able to quickly do anything relative to the speed of AI. So it's definitely not a ideal situation for this fallback, but it is there to provide some potentially equity or accessibility. For example, if you go through TSA today, you have a machine that's going to do some automatic checks, and people can opt out of that. So there's a way to opt out of that automation. And there's a human fallback, and that will do a physical check instead. That is going to be slower. They may miss things, but it is a fallback, especially for cases where maybe for health reasons, someone can't use that system. So it's very useful to have in place for things that we do not foresee at the moment. for all those edge cases, particularly equity cases or accessibility cases that the designers of the system don't see. But it is going to come at a cost. And that's something that cannot be perfectly trained. Some systems that we see today, that lack of training on the human fallback side isn't particularly going to come at a cost. For example, if you're at a traffic light, the light fails, that's your automation. If that light fails, you will have a traffic cop there to direct traffic potentially, right? And anyone who's sat through that at a busy intersection knows it's not a speedy solution. And maybe it's not even an equitable solution because you thought you had more right of way than the other lane. And so the person directing traffic is doing the best they can. And that's okay, we accept that human fallback. Now, in other cases, especially in legal cases, that human fallback is going to come at a much higher risk if it's not well trained. So certainly we have this very case dependency of what that human fallback should be trained for, as well as the acceptance that we're not going to get the speed that we might ideally see from that fallback.
And when you bring up the point of the legal situation, legal use cases, it reminds me of the current business models that provide AI tools to support things like sentencing guidelines. It would seem that this kind of fallback would potentially destroy that business model, because if somebody has, a fallback to a human, then they would completely subvert that algorithm. But I'm not that naive, so I think what would actually happen is that those commercial players would find places to hide behind, and process places where they would be able to sneak in their algorithm, but they'd position themselves in the process in such a way that they either wouldn't be apparent or you wouldn't be able to get at them. And so that makes me think again about how enforceable this pillar really is. So yeah, any thoughts on that? Or I don't always want to be the skeptic, but I do want to keep my eyes open, I think.
I think you have a really great approach there, and especially for the legal case where you might have that fallback to a single human. Now you don't have the whole sort of jury. Yeah. You don't have all those eyes on the problem. So there's a question on that human fallback of, are you now instituting a single point of bias and failure potentially?
Well,
now,
one thing
Arnold, I'm interested.
Go ahead. I would like to point out that we've got a pretty good active question and answer queue going here. And Sandy Barsky, a member of our working group, has helpfully added a link to the CPSC artificial intelligence ML tool, I guess, that gives guidelines on how to avoid or discern harmful AI if you're interacting with it. I think that's probably a pretty useful resource for everybody. And it provides sort of a standing method. It's not an instance specific tool, but it's a way just to increase your awareness about who you're interacting with, what you're interacting with, and how that interaction is going, whether it's positive or not. So let's jump into generative AI. I think earlier Ramsey made a point about some of these standards might just be accepted, and we might move on, or there might be, and I think actually Ed mentioned that rather than specifying human, we might specify some degree of, I don't know, performance, some kind of evaluated degree of performance in various fallback positions from all systems. Based on your interaction, your understanding of these systems, would we see, or do you see that these tools are going to provide the kind of fallback that's asked for in this requirement? I'll go ahead and shoot that one to Ramsey, since he brought up one of the earlier points, and he's pretty involved, maybe more hands-on involved with these tools than I am anyway. Go ahead, Ramsey.
And thanks, Ken. So the thing that I think my organization and I are finding the most compelling right now is that when we look at the perspective of academic computational neuroscience, which is where I come from traditionally, and robotics, which has worked for decades on these fundamental problems of control, by which I've got a model organism system, a robot or an embodied agent that needs to make decisions about its external environment to accomplish some sort of goal. We've traditionally looked at really adaptive bottom-up solutions that look like how the brain does things like trading off between trying new things and running with what works, to build models of the world in real time that allow these agents to execute some behavioral policy and complete their goals and their tasks. And the state of the art in those reinforcement and supervised learning based agent architectures is such that it is still really hard to get robots or disembodied agent systems to behave like they do in the laboratory once you move them to the factory floor, the war zone, the street corner, any place in real life that is not the training and testing proving ground. Getting them to behave in real life, crazy hard. One of the most shocking things that's been uncovered over the past 6 months, really, on the heels mostly of the release of GPT-4 from OpenAI, was that large language models, in all of the things they've learned here, soft, we're not going to go into the philosophy, all the things they've learned from the corpus of data they've been trained on, is how to construct goal-oriented, purposeful, adaptive planning, sequencing, and behaviors just using text-based reasoning alone. And this has kicked off this new interest in semi-autonomous and autonomous AI agent systems that do not require pre-trained models of the way the world works, but rather can assemble them on the fly based on a text corpus and good descriptions of the world around them. And this has been, I think, the biggest and most interesting open question mark for everyone in AI safety right now is all the things we thought we had more time to get right about fundamentals around alignment, control, containment, and corrigibility. All of our timelines just contracted violently.
Right.
So the interesting part of generative AI to me right now is not just, okay, what are the IP rights underneath of it? Does this really count as human creativity? But rather, we've created architectures and are now capable of doing the very human things like step-by-step reasoning, cogent planning, setting their own goals, and in the GPT-4 technical report, things like deceiving humans to accomplish their own ends, and reasoning through, I should be motivated to deceive this human to get what I want because I want to get what I want.
Right.
And so
From
the human fallback perspective, the question we should be having right now, if we're trying to look just one bend around the road, is not what are the human fallbacks around writing blog posts more effectively, or what are the human fallbacks around making this PowerPoint more effectively? What are the human fallbacks when the majority of systems we interact with contain purposeful, goal-oriented, online adaptive agents that are capable of making their own decisions and going to accomplish these goals? What are we building for the fallbacks in that world, which is the world we're already stepping into quite quickly? And it's this that to me is the most interesting part of generative. It's not the content, it's not the imagery, it's the control and agency problems. Designing fallbacks for that world looks like a fundamentally different problem that we previously thought we had to conquer.
Yes, yeah. Thanks, Ramsey. I think this is part of what's driving the conversation around these generative tools is how their behaviors are so different and seemingly so advanced from what we've experienced and even expected. The time frame, as you described, being squashed down it really comes to mind. I'm going to put Scott. I'd like to put you on the spot for a minute, just to see if you have anything that you can share about anything that your office might have seen coming through in terms of things that are looking to be being patented around this space. I wouldn't necessarily imagine there's too much that's directly related to human fallbacks, but possibly safety, or what kind of trends have you seen with these new tools? And again, not looking for any insider information, just what you can share with us.
Yeah, I have to be a little bit measured in terms of what I can say, because we are required to keep applications in confidence.
Yes.
So I can't share too much other than to say, I think if AI applications in general, in terms of the growth of the agency and their applicability across the board has gone up tremendously over the last several years. Yeah. So if there is if someone has an idea or to think about it, We certainly are getting getting those, and large language models, Gen AI, is a very, very hot topic in technology that a lot of people are certainly looking at, and I'll say a lot of money is involved with in terms of venture capital as to how to address some of the the big questions that folks like Ramsey were raising. So sorry for a little bit of a cop out, answer, a little bit of a cop out answer.
Completely understandable. I didn't mean to put you in any tough spot, but yeah, we understand that. It's potentially an early indicator of what things are out there. But it is a good transition to the safety pillar. These LLMs seem to sort of pull in every consideration of AI all at once and put them in your face and then speed up the clock on you all at the same time. Ramsey referred to just a moment ago, he didn't explicitly call it out, but one event occurred a couple of weeks ago where ChatGPT got online, and for some reason, I think it must have been really instigated through some prompts, but it fooled an online human worker into thinking that it was a human being with impaired vision who needed help fooling a CAPTCHA screen, a window meant to keep bots out of a particular part of an application. So two things immediately jumped to mind, and I'd ask Arnold or Ed for their thoughts on this. Is in terms of safety of systems, all of a sudden we're seeing one that humans seem really easy to fool because we're kind of apparently online. Not only can we be quite unreasonable in how we talk to each other, but we also seem to be kind of trusting because if you read the transcript of what occurred, the messages the bot came back with, I wouldn't say are particularly innovative or anything. It just says, I'm a human with, so with impaired vision. So it wasn't anything that was too creative, but the human was fooled. The second thing that came up was this bot, this AI system, creating a goal for itself and an objective and pursuing that objective, even though it implied that they had to fool a human being. We don't have Asimov's laws in place, but this is a case where it was certainly violated in some sense. So Ed, do you have any thoughts on that, especially as you look for driving transformation at NASA? We're going to have trust in these systems at some level, right?
Yeah, so it reminds me that, we all have to be aware of phishing exercises in our email or in our social media. And, we in the government, I assume in industry also get specific training and how to keep an eye out for those, phishing or anything else. So one thing might be talking about it like we're doing here and practicing being on the lookout for, AI trying to spoof humans.
Yeah.
And sometimes we even do exercises that is run by our IT security folks, where they've given us all this education, and then they go, do a honeypot exercise with us, or just a training exercise. So I could see us doing that with AI systems. Another thing, just in general, that I wanted to point out with regard to safety for NASA and for other government organizations is we've all got many existing quality control processes, engineering reviews, software reviews, system engineering reviews. And I really think my personal opinion is that rather than all of us creating an entire new AI focused bureaucracy, that it's really important to inject as many of the, well, number one, rely on the existing quality control processes as much as we can to help us with AI considerations, inject new AI considerations where they belong in software development processes or engineering review processes, and then figure out, okay, what's the gap? And maybe we don't have to do all that sequentially in time. Maybe we can do them in parallel in time. But I think none of us would probably do a very good job if we tried to rely totally on some new AI quality control
Mhm.
bureaucracy. And so it's kind of like a defense in depth or a layered approach. Use what you've got, augment it, and then add what you need for helping you with safety, trustworthiness, those kind of things.
Right. Thank you.
I would definitely agree with Ed on trying to reuse the governance framework that we currently have. But I also want to emphasize the point that Ramsey pointed out, particularly in the generative AI realm, that we're really with a whole different scale and dimension of problem that we haven't approached before. And I do think it will require new types of tests and governance, even just trying to devise metrics for performance, metric for whether it's require a fallback, that something is not working. Even determine that can be quite difficult. So just a simple illustration, if you think about our current systems, we're breaking down the components, we do testing, software, hard system, we run different test cases, but how many test cases are we running? At most thousands, maybe 10,000 on the outside. But with the generative AI system, you just talk about one English sentence, 20 words, and let's say 10 to the 5 number of words, just keep it small. That's really means 10 to the 100 variations, different kind of sentences. If you drop it down 1 in a million, 110 to the 94. I mean, it's an astronomical number of cases to test when you're looking at the language. So this is a whole different scale of issue, thinking about how to understand large model outputs and trying to get a sense of, is this going to cause somebody to think more about suicide? I mean, there are tons of stuff that we have to think about and decide how to do it. Ultimately, I don't think we can do it the old way. It may be the case we have to rely on some bootstrapping method, that you use a smaller, simpler kind of a generative model to analyze a larger, more complex one.
Right.
And this is based on the whole idea of back in cybernetics, variety absorb variety. If you don't have something comparable scale to analyze it, you're not going to be able to handle the bigger complex system.
Exactly. But the point that you made about how these systems test and stress our current regulatory environment makes me remember that there's this discussion about having a new regulatory agency created specifically for AI, and it does seem to be a natural reflex of the folks here in DC to do that sort of thing. But I would appreciate the group's perspective on that. Do we think that's the right thing to do? Is that going to be just another layer, or is that going to provide the focus on AI and the resources and the expertise needed to get this kind of regulation right? And I'd like to ask Britta, if you wouldn't mind to pick that one up from your perspective.
Sure. So I'll actually kind of pull this back to where and why we do software review, because it's all related, right? And if we go into the whole software review and quality control there and look at it, usually it's related to security. And a lot of that comes out of directions by the NIST framework. That is really the precursor to the NIST AI effort. Mm-hmm. And what is that? What is this NIST risk management framework? What is its goals? Well, what its goals are not is to have a perfect system and to guarantee that your system is secure and cannot have any flaws. It is fundamentally a risk management tool. And that was its original goal when it was rolled out. It was to help companies form a common baseline. And so what's that lowest bar that you need to get to hopefully give your system some assurance? Now, there's some good suggestions in that risk management framework, but even if you followed absolutely everything, there's no guarantee that for a particular system, it will be secure. You have to consider how the system's used, where it's used, who's interacting with it. There's any number of considerations that are unique to a given system. So any sort of guidelines or frameworks that are coming out on that side really are about trying to raise the minimum bar, that lowest common denominator of just try to manage risk. It's basically the fundamental message there. So on one hand, it's very good that we have any sort of risk management for AI to point companies, if they're not familiar with this domain, of how they should be mitigating issues. On the other hand, if this is extended and taken out of context, it might be seen very easily as a checkbox where someone can say, we have assured our AI is perfectly fine because we followed some quality control guidelines. And maybe we invested a lot of money and a lot of manpower to do that, but you have absolutely no assurance in practice for that given system that the end users are safe, that it's doing exactly what is needed and have any accessibility or equitability considerations taken into account. So when we go into the guidelines, into the government regulations, it's very useful to have that pointer. But I would caution that these are not the end goals. They're not the best version of security or best version of AI. And they are more or less a pointer for where some of the gaps could be.
Right, right. And it occurs to me that one of the challenges with AI, that, as opposed to standard or non-AI IT systems, is that they are in a different way. They are socio-technical systems. They're not just technical systems. Now, you can argue that all technology has a societal or a socio aspect to it, but AI does it in a new and stronger and deeper way, especially now that we're starting to see some behaviors that we didn't expect, and the AI community seems to be just excited about it. They're like, "Oh, emergent behavior, great! Let's see what we can make it do." When everybody else is kind of looking at it and they don't understand it anyway, and they don't, and now all of a sudden it's doing weird things. It also puts me in the mind of Nick Bostrom's book Superintelligence, where he cites his fundamental premise is that as these systems become more intelligent, we're not going to understand how they set their own goals, and we can't align our goals with theirs. We're gonna be in trouble, because as we're finding out, they're starting to do new things, and we can't really address what they're going to do. Go ahead, Brett.
You're making a great point, and I actually wanted to tie it to a question in the chat from Sandy Barsky about how we foresee citizens using the knowledge made transparent by companies which apply a responsible AI framework. Right. It ties exactly to what you're saying here. And what you're getting at is that it's a very complex and complicated space, and it's consistently changing. So even if we make things transparent to the end user, chances are the most vulnerable parts of the society are not going to see that or understand its implications, especially as it changes very quickly. Right. And so those guidelines, as with any legislation type thing, as they become very fixed, they don't adapt fast enough to that changing space. Right. And we have to be conscious of those end users, particularly those who are most vulnerable. So,
go ahead, Ramsey.
And there's something that I wanted to highlight. We're in an ATARC panel in 2023, and the Overton window around AI and responsible AI and AI trust is finally wide enough that we can talk about Nick Bostrom without getting laughed out of the room.
Right.
But like 2 years ago, that wasn't the case.
I'm aware, yeah.
Completely, but it's completely worthwhile noting that 50% of AI researchers surveyed said there's a more than 10% chance that in the next few years, these systems kill every living human, and yet we're completely fine proceeding with those being the base rate statistics. And suddenly, a lot of the things that the deep AI safety community have been extolling for the better part of a decade or two, if we want to go back to I.J. Good in the 60s, 70 odd years, 60 odd years, now suddenly are okay conversations to be having at a government adjacent panel. And there's two things that I think this points to that I've gotten to witness recently that make me more optimistic about the future of AI trust and responsible AI. And it's that we've gone through a necessary peri-academic growth period by which we started with our notions of justice and virtues and ethics, and those necessary basic building blocks for the field to say, what do we want out of a good life? And we're stepping into the operationalization stage where we're becoming more comfortable with this process looking like something at the intersection of Sarbanes-Oxley and the top 20 cybersecurity controls, where the goal is not get rid of risk, the goal is document it and manage it. And the goal is not build a more, not per se, at least as operationalized, build a necessarily more ethical and just world as much as build a world that we can understand the security lapses around and then build in mitigations that align with our notions of virtue and ethics. Right. And that is a practical distinction in where the field is today versus where it was a few years ago. And if this continues to go the way it looks like it will, I think we're going to see a new crop of conversation around AI trust and responsibility that looks more like the work that the AI safety community has done writ large. We're focusing on things like alignment, containment, control, and corrigibility, while having the continuing conversations around fairness, explainability, and data privacy. These things that previously were disregarded as, oh, that's science fiction, we need to stop letting people in Silicon Valley have the microphone, are now increasingly becoming, oh my God, they were onto something. It turns out the models were actually improving in capabilities in nonlinear time, and things we permanently moved the goalpost on for what are the last few things only humans can do. It turns out things like motivated deception, building a world model, second and third order planning. These were things that were always on the docket, and we need to become comfortable having more adults in the room style conversations where we have to admit that there's something there and we need to address it.
I absolutely agree. It's good that the Overton window is opening up, and because it seems like that increases the solution space, but it worries me too that the time constants are just out of whack. You know, you've got a control system. I go back to just, you know, history. You got a control system that's operating, that's trying to control a system that's running 3, 4, 5 times faster than the control system. So, you know, if you get their Nyquist frequency out of whack, you're never going to be able to manage this system. I'm going to go ahead and ask Ed, and then I'll shoot it over to you, Arnold. So go ahead, Ed.
Thanks, Ken. I just wanted to put in really simple terms the way that I think of something that Ramsey was just mentioning. So I think our mission with AI is to maximize the good that it puts into the world and into the nation, subject to the constraints of being ethical, responsible, secure, all these things. And whenever I think about a principle, I like to think about an anti-principle. Or so here the anti-mission is exactly what Ramsey was saying to avoid. The mission is not to minimize all risk with AI. The mission is to maximize the output, the benefit that it provides to individuals in society, subject to risk. And so if we, sometimes with new capabilities coming along, you're asking earlier about establishment of a national AI agency to like a governing body. Right. If that governing body is specifically told, you shall empower and create an environment where AI use is cultivated to the best beneficial use of humanity and the United States, subject to a set of constraints, great. Right. If, however, the regulating body has just said, go put the handcuffs on everybody, then it becomes unuseful, right, and truthfully detrimental to the larger existence of the United States. If our competitors are out there using AI like gangbusters. Right. Okay. Several random thoughts connected together.
No, thank you, Ed. That's great. Appreciate it. That's good. It's always helpful to drag these conversations down to real world, real language, that kind of stuff. That's great. And I believe your point is we've got to maximize the benefit. And so we've got to make sure that the guidelines for any regulation include that. And that's certainly fitting with, you know, history for how we regulate things in the States. I'd suggest, though, that there's a complexity around AI where the negative impacts can be wildly disparate, because you've got new tools that certain actors can use for economic and security benefits in completely new, innovative, and undetectable ways. And those are things that bother me the most, is making sure, because I agree, we need to use this, we need to be careful about it, we need to make sure we don't hold everything back. But I think we've got to be aware of these other pieces that are out there. Arnold, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the part of the challenge is that in some areas we kind of already passed the point you're talking about. I want to tie it a little bit to a question that Sandy Baskey asked about the financial decision making, financial education, and so forth. If we look at just current implementation of standard process getting a loan, one of the first thing you got to figure out is your credit score. Okay, and if you'll have a choice, a couple of different places your credit score, but there's certainly no human fallback. There's no place that will give you a human calculated credit score for you, and nobody's going to accept it even if you found one. So that's a real practical case where fallback doesn't exist, and you have no alternative if you want to get a loan. There's no way around it unless you could just go somewhere individually and ask for a loan personally. So. The lot of society forces that pushes these things out to do more automation, and it's going to be, I don't know if regulation may be the right way, but we sort of need to find some mechanism to protect some of these things and limit the force of these societal and economic pushes, including things like autonomous weapon. I mean, there's some agreement not to pursue it, but there's tremendous pressure to do more and more of it. I'm sure you folks know about.
Right, and to push back the definition of what is autonomous.
Right, right.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brenna. Oh, I'm sorry, Arnold, were you done?
No, I was just going to mention that you might know that the U.S. Navy is developing autonomous ships.
Right,
So
exactly.
Right. It's in the work already.
Exactly. Go ahead, Britta.
So you raised the question of basically the innovation side and what happens when we do too much enforcement and potentially hold back innovation in this domain, and how does that affect, for example, a certain country's ability to get ahead. And one thing I would like to raise here and point to is, let's not forget the trendsetters. So let's not forget the trendsetters. There's major companies, the mega companies, who have definitely more resources for review, who have more widespread impact, and who operate internationally. And that's a key distinction between smaller companies who, if we say they have to do this high degree of assurance, will basically kill their business and ability to even begin talking about the problem. Whereas when you say, looking at trendsetters of these major companies, if they take the responsibility to have more assurance on some of their products and the ethical implications and potentially where that product could go, that doesn't just affect one country, it affects many. We see this in legislation abroad at the moment, for example, happening in Europe with the Digital Markets Act. It's not a US policy, it is a European-based policy, but it will affect all of the applications here in the US because companies roll out one product. And when it meets the requirements of a given country, it is going to be the same product rolled out elsewhere. They're not going to usually reinvent the product multiple different ways.
Similar to the GDPR, right?
Exactly. So in that case, when we look at the guidelines that we can set forth or the suggested assurance degrees, there's actually a lot that the trendsetters can do in this space that not necessarily other companies can do. And it's going to affect where we go in the long term, and how they interact with policy and guiding policy is also going to be determined for the future.
Right. Yeah, thanks for that. We need to keep that kind of dynamic in mind as we start thinking about the regulatory frameworks. It feels almost inevitable that something's going to pop up, that something's going to be created and directed at this problem, because again, that seems like their reflex. But I think everybody here understands or believes that there's limitations to what you can do, and there's probably some nuance here about how to do it in this space that's a little bit different. I think we've already covered how we're not sure about how the advanced systems are evolving in their behaviors and what they might do moving forward. So it makes it difficult to understand what the national debate might be. I'll go ahead and repeat it. So I said before, where back in the day, I was involved in nuclear power quite a bit, and we had a really big problem. We essentially failed the public relations challenge in the 70s by not having an ability to educate the public on risk, not being able to formulate a good conversation about that, and losing out to folks who were motivated for whatever set of reasons to fight against the technology. I think AI has exactly the same profile. It's hard to understand, it's pervasive, it seems to be an existential threat. It's very dramatic to talk about, so we can expect the conversation to be heightened on all the platforms, that sort of thing. But I'm wondering if anybody has a suggestion about how we can have a better, more informed conversation around AI, even as its behaviors seem to becoming more critical, potentially unpredictable. Go ahead, Ramsey.
I've got one that I'll steal from a friend and colleague, Jeff Schaefer over at Booz Allen Hamilton, who leads their responsible AI practice. And he, with a really good background in the fundamental ethics and virtue underneath everything we're discussing when it comes to responsible AI methodologies, has pointed out that a blind spot we have sometimes when talking about what we want out of this world is in appropriately fixating on what can go wrong and what are we doing to mitigate ultimate downside here. We don't also breathe air into the conversation about what can go right. And his view is that that's a really important missing part of the discourse around AI, is we have to be talking about consistently what the upside looks like in terms of the things that we value out of a good life and a good society and a good community. And these things aren't more efficient operation, better customer experience, more shareholder value. They're the things that actually connect to us and make life worth living, about what we want out of our longevity and our identity and our use of energy and information, the ways that we actually would like to be. And it forces us to have a sense of optimism still. And if we only focus on the optimism, we lose sight of our duty at a frontier to navigate with grace and dignity. If we only fixate on risk mitigation, we lose sight of why we're even doing this in the first place.
Yeah.
And by expanding that conversation back to, we need to be consistently viewing the upside of these systems and their practical impacts against our sustainable development goals collectively as part of the same conversation that we're having around our ability to trust AI. Once we regain that focus, we're much more likely to still remember why we're doing this, other than a feeling that the capital markets have given us no option but to proceed. We have to remember that, like, there is still something here we do collectively want.
Right. And that collective understanding, I think, again, it's one of these things about AI that makes it fascinating but troubling, is that, as you mentioned, the capital markets are behind the creation of a vast array of consumer goods, and AI is being, I think, infused into all those consumer goods. And it seems to me that the killer app for AI, so get out your investment notes, but I think the killer app for AI is to have a system that is in a very human and emotional way connects to the individual, and then mitigates, manages, is a concierge for all the other digital goods that are out there. So this is an AI system that knows you, that understands you, that sits there only to make you feel better and to make your life easier and to remove all the obstacles and make you secure. I think that's the kind of direction that a lot of this technology is headed, because it seems to me just so compelling a vision that people would want to do that. You can see this happening. It's just building on the babies that the dolls that you used to pull and they would talk to you for a minute, but now it's actually able to do it, and it can follow you throughout your life. And what I'm worried about is that the conversation will be beside the point. You know, we'll be gone with we'll be done with the idea of whether society is going to anthropomorphize these systems. It already has, and in fact, it's already creating emotional connections to these systems, and these systems are nefarious in their ability to detect that and build on that. And there's so much money at stake because you would end up controlling every economic decision or influencing every economic decision a person made. So this to me is a real, one of the real risks. If you ignore all the other risks around critical infrastructure, cyber warfare, and those kinds of risks, which we've been talking about for decades, this is a new one for me, and I'm having a hard time, as you can tell, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around it and thinking about what it actually means. But we've got about 4 minutes left. So since we haven't really dealt with any deep topics yet, I thought I'd go ahead and ask everybody to, if you had any final thoughts. This is not to put you any pressure, but if you had any final thoughts you'd like to share, since this is the last of our panels on the blueprint, and any thoughts, words of encouragement about how we might move forward in an equitable and efficient manner.
Ken, I got an idea.
Yeah.
So I think we all have to get comfortable with issuing interim guidance that's not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
It's most important to, be as good a guidance as you can in a very timely manner as these systems evolve, rather than taking forever and being late.
Right. Good point. Thanks, Ed.
I can follow up on that one and say we should all be comfortable with having that guidance be separate from legislation, where we can give suggestions that may be very marketable for a company to leverage without having it fundamentally written into law and then have to be repealed later as this very fast changing technology adapts.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, to balance out some of the grimmer prediction, let me point out that last week the VA held their AI Health Summit, which has many excellent talk, and the prospects for AI to really help with drug research, clinical prediction, prognosis, and it's phenomenal. And I can guarantee AI will surpass human performances in all the radiologists and all the imaging specialists stuff, because they're going to be able to learn from more cases than any human in a lifetime can ever learn from. So just a question of time and tuning before they surpass all human performances. So that's on a good note.
Right. Thank you, Arnold. Appreciate that. Absolutely true. Go ahead, Scott.
I'll throw in there. I think it's important to, look at innovation and the journey of innovation as well as artificial intelligence, that, innovation and the rate in which we as society adopt it isn't necessarily already written. There's nothing today that, that really says, we as a society could, just sort of go through the Bulgarian jihad and, and throw down the machines. As it were, and to say, enough is enough. That's sort of not how we want to, I think Ramsey touched on some of this. That's not what we see as beneficial, or, what we want to get out of society is, I saved, half a point on my mortgage because it was, done through an algorithmic way versus some other way. So I think, you have that point of it. And then I think when we're looking at the framework, a big point of the framework, I think, relies or rests on this idea of transparency. Transparency certainly is great. It's a good thing. But I think we have to keep in mind, with a lot of things today, it's very easy to see what's going on within the glass cube, but not be necessarily have the tools to empower to change. That's to say you don't like the direction that it's going in. So when it comes to sort of some of the regulatory frameworks and things like that, the degree to which, it's hard to legislate away, bad behavior. There will always be people doing, bad things with technology. It's just sort of a question of when. how do we, how do we shift that sort of, information dynamics back to individuals? And maybe that's, tort liability, reform. Maybe it's, looking at, I think it's the Holly Blumenthal revisiting section, the 230 section, kind of framework to, shift some of that back so that we as consumers have a little more of a say in what we'd like to see in society.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate that. Ramsey, I can give you about 30 seconds. Sorry, but we're running short on time, but I thought you might have something to add at the end here.
Sure. Only now that Scott's brought up Butler and Jihad, our final tour through good AI literature, I'll contribute William Gibson's Neuromancer.
There you go.
It was the Swiss Act of 53, where Switzerland was the first country to begin giving out passports to non-human synthetic intelligence systems,
Right.
to the complete GDP boon of Switzerland, making it a dominant force in the new economy.
Nice.
It's one of those things right now, that's outside the Overton window, and conversations about our moral circle are outside the Overton window, but so was Nick Bostrom 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And it begs of us to imagine what the version of an ATARC panel in 2025 is going to be like, because it imagines you it forces you to imagine having hundreds to thousands of times more cheap and available compute on models trained on trillions of tokens with new capabilities that are forcing us to stare down really hard problems about what we mean when we say the C word citizen. And we get to have increasingly compelling conversations about that discourse. And every single one of them is going to seem very futuristic to us today. And then when we get there, it'll just be another ATARC panel. Yeah. And Sandy Barsley will have good questions in the comments about what it means for synthetic citizens to be applying for services from the public sector. And all of this is completely asinine until you wake up one day and you realize it's not, and we're here. And when we look around for the adults in the room, it was us the whole time. And it begs of us to be like locked into where is this going, and locked into, but what do we want out of it from our basic values that makes our nation strong? So I'm looking forward to the future panels, because I know we've gone through the Bill of Rights in its first draft here, but I want to see what we have in front of us, and I want to see us continue to align our optimism and trepidation lockstep with one another about how we navigate that with grace and dignity.
It does seem to be the challenge. Thank you, Ramsey. Very much appreciated. I just hope there are human beings involved in those future panels at this point. So thank you all. Very much appreciate your time, your insight, and your concern on these issues and your ability to help. I think these have been helpful for folks, and I do look forward to future conversations. Thank you all.